So this session, we're going to look at national nutritional guidelines and also look at weight management. So what we're looking to cover in this session is talking about giving healthy eating advice, or how to give healthy eating advice, setting goals related to body composition, identify reasoning and problems with popular diets, and we're looking at defining the energy balance equation, so a little bit of recap from level 2 stuff, and then also looking at signs and symptoms of eating disorders. Okay, so recognized places to seek nutritional information include the Food Standards Agency, the Committee on Medical Aspects of Food and Nutrition, the British Nutrition Foundation, the Institute of Optimal Nutrition, and different scientific nutrition journals, so for example, the British Journal of Nutrition. For some information on portion sizes, in your nutrition manual on page 9, it's got detail of different portion sizes, etc. in there. A few questions have come up on the paper about a typical portion size, so you'll get your information in the manual on page 9 for that. But as you can see with all of these recognized places to find information on nutrition, they're all government sources and scientific journals. So you need to make sure that if you are doing extra research, that you are looking in the right places for them. As you all know, Google and stuff, you can get some really hit and miss different types of websites on there. So if we stick to our government advice, government set agencies, if you like, it will give us the most accurate and up-to-date information we can. The one that we tend to go to first and foremost is the Food Standards Agency for our information. So healthy eating guidelines. So as we kind of looked at in level 2, we looked at the Eat Well plate. So the Eat Well plate is obviously a visual representation of as to how our food should be split up into 5 different categories. So we can see our fruit and vegetables and our bread, rice, potatoes, and pasta need to make up the largest portions of our plate. Meat, fish, eggs, and beans, and milk and dairy foods, obviously slightly smaller. And the foods and drinks high in fat and or sugar is the one that we can do without. So we can actually leave that one out and just work with the other 4 groups. So micronutrient requirements. So some different things that you may see come up on different products or in different journals, etc., are things like daily reference values, recommended daily allowances, and recommended daily intakes. So daily reference values are the estimated guidelines for the energy and nutrient needs of healthy people. They do not take into account exercise. Recommended daily allowance is a 1950s guideline for minimal intakes needed to prevent disease, but not necessarily to optimize health. Recommended daily intake then is the current system identifying minimum nutrient requirements needed to offset deficiency and disease. So just some different things that you may see on different leaflets or in different information are these DRV, RDAs, and RDIs. So the more up-to-date one are the recommended daily intakes. Most people still call it the recommended daily allowance, but it's with the difference between the two is obviously that we're looking more on the health side of things when it comes to recommended daily intake. So micronutrient requirements. Specific population groups at higher risk of nutritional deficiency include children, the elderly, pregnant and lactating women, and those with chronic disease conditions. Referral to a registered dietitian or nutritional therapist may be necessary where client needs go beyond the scope of practice. So if we come across one of these special populations who may have nutritional deficiencies, we need to make sure that we're referring them to the correct person. So for example, if we've got somebody who is diabetic, we would need to get some information from their dietitian or from their nutritionist on the foods that they can and cannot eat. So obviously with diabetes, it's sugar, so they should really eat minimal amounts of sugar, and they will have a specific diet for that. So with children, again, we need to think about how they're fueling and what activities they're doing. With the elderly, again, similar with what activities they're going to be doing and different types of fueling. Pregnant and lactating women is really, really important. And that number one, that we keep hydrated throughout any training sessions. and also making sure that they're getting adequate amounts of carbohydrates within their diet, because they are obviously eating for two. Those with chronic disease conditions, we need to take that on a case-by-case basis, really look at the individual, what the chronic disease condition is, and how their nutrition will affect that. Okay, labeling requirements. So all food labels need to have the following information on them. So they need to have the product name, they need to have the total volume or weight of the product, they need to have a date mark or the best before date, they have to have recommended storage instructions, an ingredients list, potential allergens, which has become more and more prevalent in the last couple of years, where we now have to see what exactly is in the food and what allergens can be affected by it. The manufacturers, packers, or retailers' details, and also the place of product origin. So if we have a look at the last two points there, so the manufacturers, the packers, or the retailers' details, and also need to have the place of product origin. So we need to be able to track the food source right back to where it originated. So what can happen is, for example, a food may originate in Europe somewhere. It's then sent to the UK where it's manufactured. It can then be sent from the manufacturer's factory to a packaging unit, okay, so in a different part of the country, and then obviously it can be sent all around the country to the retailers. So we need to be able to track right back as to where that product has come from. So a nutrient table needs to have the following information: macronutrients and calorie content per 100 grams and per serving. Okay, so as we can see in the example here, we've got, which is a drink actually, so we've got the macronutrient and the calorie content per half can, and also per 100 milliliters. So we can do calculations with these different numbers, sorry. So typical values, however, there's a 20% leeway allowed. So the government actually allow a 20% leeway on the information that they're given. So if we look at the fat content of a product, they're actually allowed to go 20% above or 20% below what they're actually putting on their food label, okay, which is quite a big discrepancy. One study found that only 7% of tested food products actually met the stated values, which is quite alarming. Okay, food quality. So the organic farming movement began in the 1940s and has now grown and developed into a highly marketable force. Plant foods contain phytochemicals that are types of plant nutrients found to benefit the human body in many different ways, from cancer prevention, cholesterol management, and in preventing oxidation and damage of structures. One study found 85% of organic produce had equal or higher nutrient content, and the Soil Association certifies approximately 70% of UK organic produce. The one thing to note from this is about phytochemicals. Okay, so phytochemicals, so foods containing phytochemicals, plant nutrients found to benefit the human body and also prevent with things like cancer, cholesterol management, etc. Seen some questions come up on the paper about phytochemicals, so know that little paragraph. Okay, food quality. So the Soil Association states organic produce has minimal use of additives, no pesticides, fungicides, or herbicides used in its production, no genetically modified foods used, no routine antibiotic use on animals, and animal welfare is paramount. Okay, so when we look at organic food, it needs to ensure these 5 points that they are adhering to these guidelines. Okay, any questions so far before we move into hydration? Okay, so hydration. Water provides a number of fundamental functions in the body. It is the medium in which all our cellular chemical process take place. It enables the transport of nutrients and gases around the blood. It provides lubrication to our joints and protects our protection for our organs, and it allows maintenance of a consistent body temperature. During physical activity, the body's demands for water increase. Regular fluid breaks of between 200 and 300 milliliters have been suggested for 90-minute activities. Frequency of breaks may vary between 1 and 6 per hour. Okay, so obviously it will depend on the amount of activity that you're doing, on how much extra water your body will require. So you can identify your estimated water intake required according to body weight. So you can compare your regular intake and determine how to achieve that goal if you're lacking. So somebody who is 75 kilograms, for example, needs to be taking in 2.3 liters of water per day. So this is just the recommended daily intake of water. Okay, so you can kind of have a look, see where you are on the body weight, and then look at what your estimated daily water intake should be. Okay, so obviously with exercise, we would need to add to that. With activities throughout the day, we'd need to add on top of that number. Okay, weight management. Distribution of adipose tissue. So where we store body fat is influenced by genetics, gender, and hormonal dominance. Two main categories of body fat distribution are nationally recognized and discussed as part of health profiling. So a gynoid or pear-shaped obesity and android or apple-shaped obesity. So which one do men tend to be, gynoid or android?
Android.
Android, yeah. So men tend to, if they're increasing body fat, it tends to sit on the stomach and the midsection, whereas in females, it tends to sit on the buttocks and thighs. Goal setting and body composition. So when we measure body composition, we've got different ways that we can do it. So we can look at body fat percentage, we can look at BMI, we can use waist to hip ratios, and we can look at waist circumference. So with body fat percentage, there's different ways of measuring body fat percentage. So there's lots of like handheld devices that you can use. There's the calipers that you can use, scales that you can use as well. So depending on what you've got available to you, for you to use, go with that, and then make sure, as with all of these measurements and all of these tests, we need to ensure that each test is the same as the first one. So all of the conditions that you've done the first test in, we need to replicate those each time we do it. So it's important that if we're doing a body fat percentage today at 12 o'clock, then when we come back in 6 weeks' time, we need to try to do that body fat percentage test again at 12 o'clock on the same time of day. Because body fat percentage can fluctuate throughout the day. Very, very small, obviously, but we can change it. And also the reading that you get from the machine can change as well. So hydration is important. So the more hydrated that the individual is, you're going to get a more accurate reading, especially if you're using the bioelectrical impedance, which is the scales that you stand on, the handheld devices. So the more hydrated, the better reading that you're going to get for that as well. Now, there's different pieces of equipment that you can use for that. For BMI, so simple calculation where you're working out weight in kilograms divided by height in meters squared. So you can calculate the individual's BMI, body mass index. Waist to hip ratio, so you take a measurement of the waist, take a measurement of the hip, work out the ratios of the two, and then there's a guideline of healthy and unhealthy for those, and also waist circumference. So we'll take a waist measurement, and again, there's a chart that we look at in a second where we can grade what level the individual is at. So do any of you use any of these tests? Have you used any of these tests before, or any questions on them? Okay, so body fat percentage chart. So what we've got is the classifications down the left-hand column, and then our ranges for women and men. So for a lean body fat percentage, women need to be between 18 and 22%. For men, it's between 8 and 12%. For moderately lean, for women between 22 and 30%, for men between 12 and 20%. Excess fat for women is between 30 and 40%, for men is between 20 and 30%. And a high body fat risk for women is above 40%, and for men is above 30%. Okay, so you can look at these classifications, and then once you've done a body fat percentage with your client, you can see as to what classification they are. And then off the back of that, you can set targets. So for example, if we've got somebody who's in the excess fat range, then we may set a target to bring them down into the moderately lean range. Once they've achieved that, then we'd aim to bring them down into the lean range. Okay. Any questions on any of those? Okay. So other classifications, and so what we can do here is we can look at the body mass index. So body mass index, so we're looking at the obesity class, and we're looking at the BMI, so the result that we get, the calculation that we get. So somebody who's underweight will have a BMI of less than 18.5. An acceptable body mass index is between 18.5 and 24.9. Overweight is between 25 and 29.9. Obesity, so medical referral. So if we've get somebody with a BMI of between 30 and 34.9, they need medical referral. Severe obesity then is between 35 and 39.9, and then morbid obesity is anywhere above 40. Okay. So we've spoken before about BMI. You know, we don't tend to like BMI because it's not a relative representation of somebody who maybe has high muscle mass. But the thing is, you as a personal trainer will make that judgment call. So what you would do is if you've got somebody who comes in and says, I've got a BMI of 32, which they're classed as obese, what you can then do is you could either do a body fat percentage test, which will show us whether they come in the lean, moderately fat, excess fat, or high body fat risk range. And then if they are in, say, for example, the moderately lean range, and that we know that their BMI is due to muscle and not fat. Okay, so we need to know about body mass index. We need to know what each reading is. You can generally make a judgment call whether the body mass index reading is through body fat or because of muscle as soon as the person walks in the door. Okay, you can see whether it's fat or whether it's muscle. Okay, but don't just say to the individual, oh yeah, your BMI is high because your fat percentage is too high. Actually do a body fat percentage test as well, because again, you can use that to set targets and set goals for the individual. Waist circumference, so if we measure an individual's waist, anybody who's low risk for men is a waist measurement of less than 94 centimeters. For women, it's a waist measurement of less than 80 centimeters. High risk for men is above 102, and for women is above 88 centimeters. Waist to hip ratio, so again for males and females, so once we work out the ratios, high risk for men is anything greater than 1, for females is greater than 0.85. Moderate risk, 0.9 to 1 for men, 0.8 to 0.85 for females, and then low risk is anything less than 0.9 for men and less than 0.8 for women. Have you guys got any questions on any of those charts that we've just looked at? So body fat percentage, body mass index, waist circumference, and waist hip ratio.
Would we be doing all of these tests?
You don't have to. You kind of choose which ones are more relevant for your client, really, and what equipment you've got available to you. So, like, to be honest with you, once you've got like a measuring tape, you can do, you know, waist circumference, waist to hip ratio. If you've got a person's height and weight, you can work out their body mass index. The best one, personally, is a body fat percentage, because you know exactly how much body fat is in that individual, and then you can work on reducing that body fat. Because a lot of pieces of equipment as well will give you a body fat percentage, but they'll also give you a lean muscle mass. So you can look at so maybe their scales, the weighing scales is not changing much, but you may see that the body fat is coming down and the lean muscle mass is going up. And muscle, as we know, weighs more than fat. So the scales might not change, but it's good to see the body fat coming down and the lean muscle going up. So we're not too worried about the scales. We're more worried about those body fat readings.
Okay.
Is that okay? Cool. So again, the more tests you do, the more you can kind of work with your client, and it can motivate your client a little bit more, but you don't have to do them all. Okay, so different weight loss programs that are out there. So we've got fasting, very low calorie diets, excuse me, slimming groups, meal replacement programs, food combining, fat burning supplements, ketogenic diets, and Paleolithic diets. So you've probably heard of all of, or if not most of, these different types of diets that are out there that people tend to jump on to try and lose some weight. So what I've done is I've kind of looked at each of these diets. So what you can do is, I won't read all these out to you, but what I've done is I've put together the reasons behind why people would take part in some of these diets, and then some of the problems that are associated with these dietary methods. Okay. One of the ones, where's it gone? Sorry. So calorie counting groups, so which is at the bottom of this one. Be careful with calorie counting groups. A lot of people have seen some good results from them, but in the problems is that yo-yo dieting cycle is common from it. So people will lose a lot of weight from it. As soon as they ease off or stop, then they'll put the weight straight back on again. Okay, so that's one just to keep an eye on. Okay. Any questions on any of those, guys, or do you want me to actually go into any detail on any of them? Have any of you tried any, or?
Pretty much everyone.
Yep. I've done the fasting one just because I basically had a client who was interested in doing it. I didn't know a lot about it, so I said, right, I'll do it for a couple of weeks and see what it's like. So with the fasting, I found that I did lose a little bit of weight, but the third point on the problem is lack of energy, because what I was doing was I was basically not eating until 1 o'clock in the day. Then I would have an 8-hour window where I was allowed to eat. So between 1 o'clock and 9 o'clock in the evening. And then so between 9 p.m. and 1 o'clock the next day, I wasn't eating anything. Drinking black coffee and water is fine. But when it comes to like nutrients, foods, I wasn't eating anything. So I found that my energy levels were just totally shot after a few weeks. So yeah, wouldn't advise it. Okay. Energy and metabolism. So the components of energy expenditure are as follows. So basal metabolic rate, which we looked at earlier on in a bit of detail, thermal effect of food, and thermal effect of activity. Each of these components need to be taken into account when considering energy balance. So basal metabolic rate, I'll just quickly recap this. So BMR is the required level of energy needed to keep bodily functions ticking over. It comprises the largest portion of our daily energy needs, and the brain alone averages 600 calories per day. Thermal effect of food. So thermal effect of food is the amount of energy required to eat and digest any food consumed. So for men, the thermal effect of food is approximately 6 to 10% of the daily energy needs. So for example, if a male is taking in 2,500 calories per day, 6 to 10% of that is purely down to eating and digesting food. For females, it's between 6 and 7% of their daily energy needs. So 2,000 calories, you're talking about 6 to 7% of that is just purely about eating and digesting food. So as we said earlier, energy intake for women is approximately 2,000 calories per day. Energy intake for men is approximately 2,500 calories per day. These general guidelines do not take into account individual variation. So when we look here, so the thermal effect of activity, when we looked earlier today on the basal metabolic rate, and then we put in a multiplication for their activity levels, that's what we're talking about with the thermal effect of activity. So for somebody who is like a light exercise, we're multiplying their BMR by 1.5, I think it was. 1.4. So that's the thermal effect of activity. So you've got their BMR and we multiply their activity level on top. Sorry. Okay. So energy deficit. So in order to prevent a drop in micronutrient intake, it is important not to restrict dietary intake too severely. The ACSM, which is the American College for Sports Medicine, they advise a 500 calorie daily deficit. It is suggested this may cause 1 pound of weight loss per week. This is only a guideline and will be subject to individual variation. So to create that energy deficit, so different options to create the energy deficit. One of them is diet restriction alone. Reduce your dietary intake by 500 calories per day. So we'd look at the amount of calories you're eating, and then we're going to cut out 500 calories per day in different ways. Another way is exercise intervention alone. So you increase your exercise or activity by 500 calories per day. So you burn an extra 500 calories per day. And the other way is exercise and diet restriction combined. So increase your activity by 250 calories, so burn an extra 250 calories per day, and then take in less than 250 calories per day. This is probably the best way to do it, is to look at nutrition, reduce by 250, look at exercise and activity, and increase by burning an extra 250. So the energy balance equation states that body weight will remain the same when calorific intake equals calorific expenditure. Excess energy is stored as fat weight. The key to losing fat weight is to create an imbalance between energy expenditure and energy intake. So nice and simple, energy in, when energy in is greater than energy out, you get weight gain. When energy in is less than energy out, you get weight loss. And when energy in equals energy out, you get weight maintenance. Okay, so if you've got a weight loss client, keep it simple. Look at the energy balance equation and say, we need to reduce the amount of energies that you're bringing in and increase the amount of energy that you're pushing out to ensure that we are getting weight loss. Don't think about carbohydrate restriction or anything like that. Just look at the food diary and look at how you can change their diet slightly, making it more healthy, but also looking at the amount of calories that they're taking in. Can we decrease the amount of calories safely of what they're taking in? Then look at their activity and see how we can increase their activity so we're burning more calories. So it's really simple. We make that energy imbalance. So energy in less than energy out. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Everybody thinks that losing weight is really difficult and complicated. Well, not it is difficult. Sorry, that was a wrong thing to say. But they think they can make it really complicated. But if we just keep it simple and cause that energy imbalance, we can achieve some really good results. Okay, additional considerations: frequency of meals, the effects that the meals have on insulin, and the biochemical individuality. So what we're talking about here is the frequency of meals, how many meals the individual is having per day. Little and often is better. The effect that what they're eating has on insulin. So remember we spoke about if they're eating high GI foods, we're going to get that sugar spike. Insulin will be released to bring that sugar down, and then we get that energy lull. The biochemical effect, biochemical individuality, what that's talking about is we need a variety of fruit and vegetables to ensure that we're getting all of vitamins and minerals required in our diet. So meal frequency, research has shown that regular meals, 3 per day, is recommended. This means that there's less hunger due to more stable blood sugar, and metabolism is maintained and more likely to have a nutrient balance. Okay, any questions on any of that before we move on to eating disorders? Okay, so the 2 eating disorders that are probably more recognized that we know about are anorexia and bulimia. Okay, so we as personal trainers need to be aware of these, and we need to think about the signs and symptoms of anorexia and bulimia with our clients. So signs and symptoms of anorexia. So we've got the physical signs and symptoms where physically we can see there's extreme weight loss, insufficient growth, constipation or abdominal pains, dizzy spells, hair loss, poor circulation, dry, rough, discolored skin, and loss of bone density. Psychological signs and symptoms, so an intense fear of gaining weight, distorted perception of body, denial of that there's a problem, and mood swings. Behaviors, then we see rituals attached to eating, secrecy, so actually hiding what they're eating, restlessness and hyperactivity, wearing baggy clothes, and vomiting or taking laxatives. Long term, difficulty in becoming pregnant, and osteoporosis and potentially death are long-term effects. With bulimia, what we tend to see in the physical is frequent weight changes. So weight changes will fluctuate up and down, going to the toilet after meals, sore throat and tooth decay, swollen salivary glands, swollen face, poor skin, lethargy, and tiredness. Psychological signs and symptoms: uncontrollable urges to eat, an obsession with food, distorted perception of body, mood swings, anxiety and depression, low self-esteem, shame, and guilt. Behavioral signs and symptoms: so binging and vomiting, or binging and purging, as it's also written as, excessive use of laxatives, periods of fasting, excessive exercise, and secrecy. And in the long-term effects, potential heart attack, rupture in the stomach, erosion of teeth, and choking. Okay, so we need to be aware of the signs and symptoms of anorexia and bulimia. So if we see any signs and symptoms of these, we can take action on it. Has anybody ever come across any of this or wondered as to how they, if they've ever had to deal with it?
No, luckily.
No. Good. Yeah. Hopefully you won't have to, but just be aware is the thing. Okay. Religious and cultural influences. So food habits and traditions vary across the world. Nutritional advice should support personal decisions and customs. So if you've got somebody who is Muslim, for example, and they partake in Ramadan, you need to do some extra research and look into what happens in that month, and also then what the nutritional implications will be on their activity and their exercise. Okay, think about Christmas. What tends to happen in Christian groups over Christmas and Easter? Tend to eat loads more than what they normally do. Excess food, yeah, and tends to be bad foods as well. So the tin of Quality Street tends to get wiped out in the space of a couple of hours. Okay, so we need to think about, leading up to Christmas, trying to give our clients as healthy advice as possible. Obviously, we want them to enjoy Christmas, etc. But we need to obviously then think about what's going to happen afterwards. What effect is it going to have after Christmas? So a lot of clients will take a couple of weeks off and just say, right, I'm going to enjoy my Christmas. They've done really good work up until then. They deserve a bit of a treat, to be fair, as well. But then it's about being able to get back into it afterwards, because that's the big thing, is that people kind of will stop their training, have a really good couple of weeks, and then think, oh, I can't be bothered to go back. I've put on all this weight, etc., etc., etc. So it's up to us as personal trainers to keep them motivated. Yes, enjoy what you're doing, but keep an eye on what you're doing. Okay? Referring clients to a registered dietitian. So specific groups such as children, the elderly, and pregnant women should be investigated more closely. Now, that doesn't necessarily say that they have to be referred to a dietitian, but we just need to do a little bit more research into fueling their exercise. Health conditions that should be referred include diabetes, cardiovascular disease, elevated cholesterol, severe obesity, and cancer. So if you have any clients with any of these medical conditions, then obviously they need to be seeing a registered dietitian, or they will have guidance from their medical professional for you as well. you would also need to make sure you do extra research into this. You shouldn't really be working anybody with, for example, cardiovascular disease or elevated cholesterol unless you've got an exercise referral qualification, or as it's also known, GP referral qualification, which is changing in the new year. Any questions on any of those, or are you guys working with anybody with any particular health conditions or anything?
No.
Okay, you will come across people with different types of conditions. So make sure that you do the research. If you don't feel confident, refer them to somebody who is qualified or who has worked with them before. And always, if you're unsure, can you just go back to your GP, your medical professional, or whoever it is, and just get some information for me on what you should and should not be doing with regards to exercise and activity. And then I can make sure I incorporate that into your program. Okay, so if unsure at all, refer. And that concludes nutrition. Any questions, guys?
With the deficit of 500 calories a day, where you can mix it with 250 calories, less food, and 250 calories, but exercise burning energy, is it recommended that you don't go over that 500 calorie deficit?
Hold on 2 seconds.